When Madison woke up that morning, I'm sure she thought it would be a regular Sunday, maybe the smell of coffee wafting in from the kitchen, some lazy morning chatter over toast, a quiet day ahead. But instead, the house met her with a kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful, it felt wrong. No footsteps down the hall, no shower running, not even the soft hum of music I usually had on in the background. I was gone, and everything was still. Too still. Her hand reached toward my side of the bed, probably expecting to feel me there. But all she found were cold sheets. And on the nightstand, just one thing waited for her, a plain white envelope with her name written in my handwriting. Inside, my wedding band. No dramatic letter, no angry words. Just that ring, and the sound of the door already closed behind me. But that's not where the story begins. My name's Jack. I'm 39, and I'd spent over a decade carving out a calm, steady life in a small Vermont town. Ran a carpentry business, kept to myself, and never liked making a scene. I'm not loud. I don't do public fights, and I sure as hell don't stick around in places where I'm no longer valued. Madison was my wife for 11 years. And for a long time, she felt like home. There was something peaceful about her back then, like just sitting beside her could quiet the storm in your head. I met her one weekend at a farmer's market in Montpelier. She was picking through peaches, said the bruised ones were always the sweetest. We got married a couple years later, under a maple tree surrounded by close friends. I even built our dining table with my own hands and secretly carved her name under the edge where only I'd ever see it. But the cracks? They didn't come all at once. They came slow, subtle, almost like they were trying to be respectful. A text she answered too fast, and then flipped her phone over. A company retreat that didn't quite add up. Her workplace didn't even organize those kinds of events. She started coming home later than usual, smelling like some cologne I'd never worn. One night I asked her gently, "Are you seeing someone?" She laughed, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "Why would I do that? You've done everything right." And that was the kicker, I had done everything right. I showed up, remembered the small things, asked about her day, brought her flowers for no reason, never broke a promise. I was there. Always. But that one night, she'd gone to bed early, said she was tired. I went downstairs to grab my jacket before locking up, and her phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen, saw a message from a contact named Blake. Just Blake. Not Ben, not Brittany. Just Blake. The message said, "Still thinking about last night. That red dress drove me crazy. Same time Friday." I didn't touch the phone. Didn't need to. I didn't need photos or private eyes or some heated confrontation. I already knew. I walked back upstairs, saw her sleeping like she hadn't just bulldozed everything we built together, and that was the moment I made my decision. Over the next few days, I sold off every tool in my shop. Quietly withdrew the money I was legally allowed to take from our shared accounts. Paid off my truck, canceled subscriptions, gave notice on the lease. Bought a one-way ticket to Juneau, Alaska, a place she always said was too cold, too quiet, too empty for her taste. And during all that, she didn't notice a thing. Probably too busy texting Blake. That Sunday, I woke up at 5 in the morning. Took one last look around the home I built with my own hands. Packed what mattered, my passport, the watch my dad left me, a small wooden carving she never noticed sitting on the shelf, and the last piece of pride I still had. I placed the envelope in her hand, with a note that simply said goodbye. No tantrum. No final words. Just silence and a clean exit. Don't mistake my calm for surrender. This wasn't running away. This was me reclaiming peace. I didn't leave because of one message or one night of cheating. I left because of all the quiet nights before that, where I sat in a dim living room, TV on low, just waiting to feel like her husband again. There's one night I can't forget. Maybe 6 months before I left. I'd made dinner, nothing fancy, just grilled salmon and mashed potatoes, her favorite. She came home late, still dolled up, hair flawless, wearing a coat I'd never seen before. She kissed me on autopilot, didn't make eye contact, said she had a migraine, and that she'd eat later. Then she disappeared upstairs. That meal sat untouched for hours. The candle burned out. The wine glass stayed full. And I just sat there, convincing myself this was a phase. That maybe we were just offbeat for a while. But I was wrong. The next morning I found a restaurant receipt, 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, 1 dessert, and 2 spoons. She never said a word. And I didn't ask. That's when it hit me, she didn't even feel bad about it anymore. And that changes something inside a man. See, guilt means someone still knows they're wrong. That they still have a conscience. But once guilt fades, what's left is entitlement, distance, and cold detachment. That's who Madison had become. A stranger wearing the skin of the woman I married. As for Blake, never saw him. Never needed to. Didn't matter who he was. The betrayal wasn't just the cheating, it was in the way she slowly locked me out of the life I built, brick by brick. I didn't throw a fit. I didn't flip furniture or burn photos. That's not who I am. I just observed, quietly. The silence between us used to be comforting, now it felt weaponized. She used to tell me she liked how calm I was, how grounded. But after a while, that calm became something she mocked. I'll never forget when I suggested we take a weekend trip. Nothing fancy, just a quiet cabin upstate. No phones, no work, just us. She laughed, not in a cute teasing way, but with this sharp cold edge. Said, "You and your silence. I'd rather be stuck in traffic for 3 days than sit in the woods doing nothing with you." That was the first time I really felt how loud our quiet had become. So when I left, I wasn't escaping. I was transforming. There was no dramatic monologue, no final confrontation. I gave her exactly what she'd been giving me for years, quiet detachment. She would wake up in that house with everything still in place, except me. No shouting. No door slams. Just absence. I knew she'd eventually try to call. Maybe not right away, maybe not even that day. But at some point, the reality of the silence I left behind would hit her like a freight train. But by then, my number would be gone. My email deleted. Our cloud storage wiped. The only things I kept were the ones that truly mattered. And the part that cut me the deepest? It wasn't the affair. It wasn't even the lying. It was how she never once looked back. That was when I realized something I'd been denying for a long time. Madison never really knew me. She fell in love with the version of me I showed the world. The dependable guy. The fixer. The man who kept his cool even when everything was falling apart. The man who'd walk the dog in a snowstorm and still come back smiling. That's who I was. And I think, over the years, she mistook that steadiness for weakness. But what she didn't know is that quiet men feel everything. We just don't always say it out loud. Every moment she rolled her eyes instead of listening. Every time she answered a message with more enthusiasm than she answered me. Every night she came home smelling like someone else's cologne. I kept all of that. Not in a journal. Not in a file. But in me. Stored in the parts of myself I stopped showing her a long time ago. You know, there's this type of pain that settles in when you realize the person you built a life with has already emotionally left the room, long before you ever packed a bag. And after a while, you start feeling like a ghost in your own home. And ghosts? They don't scream. They haunt. The moment that flipped the switch for me happened one night while she thought I was asleep. I was lying on the far edge of the bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. That's when I heard her creeping downstairs. She spoke in a whisper, laughing quietly on the phone, and then I heard her say something I'll never forget. "I don't think he even notices anymore. He's numb. It's like being married to a shadow." It wasn't the cruelty of those words that got me. It was the truth in them. I had become a shadow, but not because I didn't care. I was already halfway out the door in my heart. I was fading, slowly, deliberately. Letting go piece by piece, preparing for the day I'd finally disappear completely. And that's when I decided to show her the full picture of who I was, without raising my voice, without creating a scene. I would show her through the only tool I had left, my absence. See, most people think silence is just the space between words. But silence, real silence, is a decision. It's power. It's clarity. It's the loudest thing you can leave behind when words have lost their meaning. I made a plan. Not revenge. I wasn't interested in that. This wasn't about getting even. This was about reclaiming my sanity. I began to quietly unravel our life together. Shut down accounts. Sold tools. Changed the beneficiary on my life insurance policy to my 10-year-old niece. She still believes in love that doesn't betray you. And I wasn't going to leave anything for someone who couldn't value what I gave her freely for over a decade. During that final week, I gave her every opportunity to notice. Every chance to reconnect. I asked if she wanted to watch a movie. She said she was too tired. I offered to make dinner. She'd already eaten. I asked how her day went. She shrugged, busy. That was the last breadcrumb I needed. She was gone, and I was done waiting. So I let her live in the fantasy she'd built until the morning I left. When I placed that envelope beside her hand, I didn't hesitate out of doubt. I paused out of respect for the man I used to be. The man who tolerated disrespect. The man who begged with actions instead of words. Who thought love meant endurance. I wasn't that guy anymore. I left my ring not to be poetic, but because it said everything I needed to say. She would wake up to a house full of her choices, and realize what she lost wasn't just a husband, it was the man who knew her silences better than her words. She probably didn't even catch on at first. Maybe she reached for her phone, like she always did, scanning her messages before even stretching. Maybe she smiled half asleep, expecting a good morning text from the man I now knew existed. Or maybe, and this is the version I like to imagine, maybe she felt it right away. That chill when her fingers touched the cold side of the bed. That realization that something was off. The second sign? The silence. I used to always be the first one up. Making coffee, feeding the dog, maybe humming an old song while slicing fruit. That morning, none of it was there. Just stillness. Then came the third sign, the open closet. She hated when I left it open. Makes the whole room feel messy, she'd always say. But this time, it hung wide like a wound. Half the hangers empty. The bottom shelf bare where I kept my boots. The drawer where I stashed my blue wool socks, the ones she always stole in winter, completely cleared out. The room was clean, quiet, and screaming my absence. That's when she saw the envelope. She once told me that handwritten notes were more romantic than flowers. So I gave her both, on birthdays, anniversaries, even on boring Tuesdays just to make her smile. She saved all of them in a little tin box under the TV. But this one she wouldn't be saving. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't bitter. It just said, "Don't call. Don't come looking. Don't chase me. I gave you everything, except permission to treat me like I was nothing. Now I'm giving you peace. Mine. The ring stays. I don't." And under that note, inside a small velvet pouch, I left the ring, along with 2 theater tickets I bought weeks earlier. Tickets I never gave her because by then, I already knew they'd never be used. She walked downstairs and found the living room stripped of anything that belonged to me. My stack of books by the chair? Gone. The framed photo from our trip to the coast? Removed. I even left the wall hook empty, just so she'd wonder how long it had been missing. The hard drive with 10 years' worth of memories? Taken. Not destroyed, just reclaimed. She tried the banking app. Locked. Tried her card. Declined. Tried another. Same result. Opened the laptop and found one lonely file on the desktop. It was called Start Over. Inside, she found a spreadsheet with the remaining bills for the month, a polite reminder to cancel the garbage service, and the name of a moving company I'd gotten a quote from. No mess. No chaos. Just clarity. But the real punch came when she stepped into the garage. Her car was spotless. Full tank. Windows cracked slightly, just how I always left them in spring. And next to it sat a sealed plastic storage bin. Inside was everything she never asked about. The receipts from dinners she claimed never happened. The backup phone I'd found hidden in her winter coat. A list of all the places she said she'd never been but clearly had. And at the bottom? A copy of a lease agreement, for a second apartment in her name. Yeah. That one hit. She probably thought I'd never find it. Probably never dreamed I'd piece it all together. But I didn't just find it, I documented everything. Notes in the margins, dates, times. I stood back from the storm and watched it unfold like someone watching weather from behind glass. And here's the twist, I didn't expose her. Didn't tell her parents. Didn't blow up her social life. Didn't torch her stuff or key her car. I just walked. Walked away so cleanly, so completely, that all she had left was herself. And trust me, that was punishment enough. I like to picture her just standing there in the garage, surrounded by receipts and silence, finally understanding that I hadn't just found out, I'd known. For a long time. And I hadn't said a word. Because this was never about revenge. This was about finally choosing me. The craziest part? I didn't even hate her. Not really. I didn't leave to hurt her. I left because staying had started to hurt me. The truth is, I loved Madison right up to the moment I realized she didn't value love, she craved attention. She wasn't in love with another man. She was addicted to the way she saw herself through his eyes. Someone new. Desired. Unburdened by real life. A fantasy version of herself she could escape to when the real world felt too heavy. But the thing about mirrors is, they crack. And the version of herself she saw in his reflection? That wouldn't last. She'd learn that. I just wouldn't be around to see it. By the time she opened that storage bin in the garage, I was already flying high above the clouds. Looking down at the place that used to be home, and feeling, for the first time in years, weightless. When I landed in Juneau, something about the air felt different. Thinner. Cleaner. Like it hadn't been tainted by lies yet. I didn't rent a car. Didn't check into a hotel. I just walked, carrying a single bag and no clear destination. People there didn't stare. They nodded politely and moved on. No one asked questions. And for a man like me, that was a gift. I ended up renting a small cabin from a woman named Karen. She was in her mid-50s, retired schoolteacher. Tough, practical, didn't smile much, but her eyes were kind. She asked no questions when I offered to pay in cash, month to month. Just handed me the key and said, "Cabin solid. Watch for bears near the trash bins." It was perfect. One room. A tiny bathroom. A stove in the corner. The kind of place that made no promises but also told no lies. The floor creaked when it should. The wind howled through the trees like a reminder I was still alive. And when I looked out the window, there were no neighbors. Just endless pines and a silence that didn't strangle, it healed. Every morning I chopped wood. Not because I had to, I had electricity. But because I needed to feel something real again. Needed to use my hands to create instead of just hold on. For a while, that was it. Chop. Cook. Sleep. Repeat. Until one morning, my burner phone buzzed. It was one of those cheap flip phones you can grab at a gas station, cash only. I hadn't given the number to anyone. Not to Karen. Not to my family. Not even to my old boss. So when it buzzed, I just stood there. Frozen. Not in fear. But in memory. The message said, "You left everything, including me. I didn't think you had it in you." No name. No apology. Just that unmistakable tone of entitlement. I didn't need to see the sender to know it was her. Madison. She didn't ask if I was okay. Didn't even try to acknowledge what she'd done. Just made herself the victim. Like I was the one who walked out of something sacred. Like I was the one who broke us. I didn't reply. I didn't block her either. I just set the phone on the windowsill and walked out into the snow, no coat, no gloves. Just to remind myself I could still feel something without her. The cold? It didn't bite. It woke me up. In the days that followed, more texts came. Short ones like, "Where are you? Why won't you answer? I never meant to hurt you." And then the longer ones. Full of guilt-flavored excuses. She was lonely. She thought I didn't care anymore. She was confused. She thought I didn't love her. My personal favorite? I only did what I had to. You were barely there. I didn't laugh out loud, but I smiled. Quietly. Because that right there proved it. She still didn't get it. This wasn't about cheating. It was about how she changed into someone I didn't recognize. Someone who saw my consistency as boredom. Who mistook my peace for indifference. Who thought just because I didn't yell or cry or beg, I didn't feel. But pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it packs a bag and disappears. I never wrote her back. Not once. But I didn't delete the messages either. Not because I needed proof. I wasn't building a case. I kept them as a reminder of just how blind someone can be to the soul they sleep next to for over a decade. About a week later, I made a trip into town for supplies. Just basics. Batteries, Canned food, more coffee. As I stepped out of the general store, there was a woman leaning against my truck. Mid-40s, tall, sharp eyes, hair in a messy bun under a beanie, plaid jacket dusted in snow. She looked at me like she already knew me. "You're Jack, right?" she asked. I hesitated. She smiled. "Karen told me about you. Said you seemed like a guy trying to disappear. I've done that too." Her name was Rachel. Divorced 5 years. Her ex left her for someone he met at work. She'd moved up here afterward and now built cabins with her own hands. Had a scruffy old dog named Hank and a truck that looked like it had survived a war. She didn't flirt. Didn't pity me. She just said, "Want a cup of coffee?" I said yes. Not because I was ready. I wasn't. But because in that moment, I realized healing isn't about forgetting. It's about building a version of yourself strong enough to look in the mirror again and say, "I'm not who I was, but I like who I'm becoming." Madison probably still believed I'd left because of Blake. But the truth? I left because I finally remembered what I deserved. And once that truth hits you, really hits you, you can't unsee it. You can't unlive it. She stopped texting after a month or so. Maybe she gave up. Maybe she was waiting for me to blink. Or maybe, just maybe, she finally had to sit with herself. Not the curated version of her people saw on social media. Not the woman who always had somewhere to be or someone to talk to. The real her. The one I once loved. The one I buried when I walked away. Life up north was simple, but it sure wasn't easy. That's the thing people don't get. Simple doesn't mean effortless. I had to chop wood before sunrise, check for moose near the back porch, cook every meal from scratch. But every task required presence. Focus. That's what healed me. When you live in a place where forgetting to close a window means frozen pipes, you stop drifting through life. You show up. Fully. Eventually, I started building again. Slowly. First it was just a bench for the porch. Then a couple shelves. Then a tool shed beside the cabin. Word got around. One day Rachel dropped off a stack of old lumber, said she needed help with a porch swing. We didn't talk about pain. We didn't sit around dissecting our pasts. We worked. Hands in sawdust. Breath in the cold. Respect in the silence. Then, one early April afternoon, as the snow began to melt and the trees started whispering promises of spring, Karen knocked on my door. She handed me a folded piece of paper. No stamp. No envelope. Found it tucked under the door at the store. I didn't even need to open it to know who it was from. It smelled like lavender and coconut, the same expensive perfume Madison used to wear when she still cared how she smelled around me. There was no "Dear Jack." No soft lead-in. Just her handwriting, sharp and steady. "You didn't just leave me. You made me question if I ever really knew you. Was I really that blind? Or were you always planning your exit? I told my sister you disappeared. Told my friends you had a breakdown. But the truth is, I'm the one breaking. I thought I had all the power. I thought men like you didn't leave. I was wrong. And I hate that you made me see it. I read it twice. Then I burned it. Not because I was angry. But because I refused to carry her confusion anymore. I wasn't her therapist. I wasn't her reflection. And I wasn't going to come back just because she finally realized I was gone. A few days later, something weird happened. Some guy pulled up in a big SUV with out-of-state plates. He asked for directions to a hiking trail. But he kept glancing at my cabin. On the passenger seat, I spotted a folder, open just enough to see photos. My face was on one of them. I didn't say a word. Just pointed north. Watched him drive off. That night, I locked every door. Not out of fear, but because I was done being found. Turns out, when someone realizes they can't control you anymore, they try to study you. And when they can't figure you out, they send someone who might. After that, I changed my number again. Got a P.O. box 2 towns over. Started driving farther out for supplies, places where nobody knew me, where nobody asked questions. I wasn't going to live the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, not for her, not for anyone. Madison had already taken enough from me. She wasn't going to take my peace too. So I focused forward. One morning, while I was working on the frame for a small greenhouse, Rachel showed up with a jar of soup. She sat on the edge of my porch, sipping from her own thermos. We didn't talk about the letter. We didn't mention the guy in the SUV. We just sat there, her eyes on the trees, mine on the wood grain in my hands. And after a long stretch of silence, she said something I'll never forget. "You're not lost, Jack. You're just new." That hit me. Because she was right. I wasn't broken anymore. I wasn't hiding. I was becoming someone who didn't need validation from people who didn't deserve access to him. Someone who didn't jump every time his phone lit up. Someone who could finally sit with silence and know it wasn't something to fear, it was something to trust. And most importantly, I was becoming someone Madison no longer had permission to reach. This wasn't revenge. It was growth. It was healing. It was evolution. That spring, the snow began to melt for real. You could hear the trees exhale. The forest felt different, like even it had been holding its breath. I found myself walking deeper into it than I ever had. No plan. No map. Just a thermos, some gloves, and the need to keep going. I ended up at a frozen creek. Sat down on a rock. Closed my eyes. Let the wind speak. That place didn't ask who I had been. It didn't care about my past. It just let me be. But the past? It doesn't always knock. Sometimes it just slips in through the cracks. When I got back to the cabin, the front door was open. Not busted, not broken. Just ajar. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just stood there. Still. I hadn't told anyone where I lived. Had moved twice since Rachel first helped me settle in. This new spot was even more remote. No address. No trail. No footprints. And yet, there it was. A small envelope on the counter. My name written on it in red ink. Not Jack Whitman. Just Jack. I didn't open it right away. I checked every room. Windows still locked. Doors untouched. Nothing was missing. Nothing moved. Except that envelope. Eventually, I opened it. Inside was a photo. Old one. Probably 2 years back. Me and Madison in the backyard. Lawn chairs under the string lights, a beer in each of our hands. She was laughing. I wasn't. I remember that night. We'd had friends over. She disappeared for almost an hour, said she was getting more ice. But the cooler never moved. Her phone buzzed the whole time she was gone. I'd known. I just didn't say anything. On the back of the photo, written in that same red ink, was a single sentence. "You looked like a stranger that night." I just didn't want to admit it. No signature. No threats. Just that. I didn't feel angry. Didn't cry. I just sat with it. And for the first time in a long while, I admitted something to myself. There was a part of her, buried under all the denial and pride, that remembered the version of us that was real. The part of her that used to know me. The part that once held my hand for no reason, just because it felt like home. But knowing that doesn't mean redemption. A photo doesn't undo 1,000 silent betrayals. A sentence doesn't repair what years of indifference destroyed. Still, I didn't burn it. I placed it in a drawer, face down. Not as a keepsake, but as proof that I hadn't imagined everything. That something once existed. And that it ended the moment she chose her ego over our vows. Later that night, Rachel dropped by. She noticed something was off but didn't pry. Just handed me a cup of weak coffee and sat next to me on the porch. After a long stretch of quiet, she spoke. "Disappearing isn't the hardest part," she said. "It's what happens when someone tries to reach into your new life without asking permission." She was right. Walking away is tough. But staying gone when the past comes clawing back, that's harder. That night, I wrote a letter. Not to Madison, to myself. I wrote down every truth I'd discovered. Every moment I stayed when I shouldn't have. Every part of me I'd lost in the name of being a good man. Then I folded that paper and tossed it in the fire. Because I didn't need to hold on to my pain anymore. I was already living the proof that I'd changed. By May, the snow was gone. Not just off the trees and rooftops. It melted off my shoulders too. The weight of who I used to be, what I tolerated, what I accepted, that all faded into the ground. I spent most of that month building a fence for an older couple down by the lake. They paid me in firewood and bread, and it felt like plenty. On weekends, I helped Rachel put together a small workshop for her newest project, hand-carved furniture for hikers. She showed me how to breathe again. I showed her how to sand corners without cracking the wood. One morning, I stepped outside barefoot. Let the cold grass hug my feet. Closed my eyes. And I didn't think about her. Or us. Or what could have been. I just stood there. Present. Alive. And that's when it hit me, clear as the mountain air. I didn't leave because I was broken. I left because I refused to stay small. People act like staying is strength. Like pain is noble. Like silence is peace. But sometimes, walking away is the loudest kind of love. The love you finally give to yourself.